Hello and welcome back to the deep dive. I really hope you are seated comfortably, or if you're on a treadmill, maybe crank the incline up a little bit, because today we are climbing a mountain of history.
It's a steep one.
It is. So imagine for a second you are living in a society where the livers of power, and I'm talking about the judges, the bureaucrats, the university professors, the people who decide your fate, are almost exclusively controlled by a group that makes up, what, barely 3% of the population?
It sounds like the setup for a dystopian novel, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A tiny elite holding all the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly. But this isn't fiction. And now imagine the sheer organizational weight, the effort required to flip that pyramid upside down, to not just complain about it in tea shops, but to build a political machine that dismantles that monopoly, law by law, order by order.
And that's exactly what we're talking about today.
That is what we're unpacking. We're looking at the Justice Party rule and the rise of the non-Brahmin movement in the Madras Presidency.
And for everyone listening, especially our aspirants, this isn't just some piece of regional history. This is the laboratory. This is where the DNA of modern Indian politics, reservation, social justice, federalism, the very concept of backward classes was first spliced together.
It's so true. If you want to understand the current debates on, say, the caste census or the history of the Dravidian model of governance, you absolutely have to go back to Madras in 1916.
You have to start here.
But before we really get into the weeds, I need to set the context for all our listeners, especially those following the Simplified UPSC by PPP series. We are doing a comprehensive summary of Chapter 18 of the Tamil Nadu history textbook, Class 12.
But we're not just reading the book aloud. That's not the point.
No, absolutely not. Our mission here is to wire this history directly into your brain for the exam, linking every major event, every personality, to previous year questions or PYQs.
We're going to highlight exactly where the examiners like to set their traps. The dates, the names of journals, the specific wording of an act, all the stuff that trips people up in prelims.
Exactly. So here's the deal. If you find this deep dive valuable, and I truly hope you do, I'm going to humbly ask you to please subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel.
It really does help the algorithm find more people like you.
It does. And if you are capable, and I want to stress, only if you are capable, please consider supporting us on Patreon. That financial fuel is, it's what keeps the lights on here and allows us to keep the content flowing.
And on that note, a massive, massive shout out to all of our current supporters. You guys are the absolute backbone of this operation. We literally couldn't do this level of deep research without your help.
Truly. Thank you. Also, don't forget to like this audio and share your comments below. We actually read them and they help shape what we do next.
We do.
Okay, one last logistical thing. The free notes with a bunch of practice PYQs are up on our public Telegram channel right now. Go grab them.
But if you want let's call it the red carpet experience.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I'm talking access to all the videos in this entire series all at once, plus their corresponding premium notes, which have detailed explanations, extra PYQs, and even model mains answers all organized perfectly. You need to get into the private Telegram library.
It's the most efficient way to revise. Hands down. Shoot a DM to the admin on the public Telegram channel, and they'll get you sorted out for the private library access.
All right, housekeeping done. Let's get in our time machine and go to Madras, early 20th century. Expert, paint the picture for us. Why did this movement explode when it did? Movements don't just appear out of a vacuum, right? There has to be a catalyst.
Right. There's always a context. And to understand the catalyst here, you have to look at the pressure that was building up. The textbook uses the term social dominance, but let's be a bit more specific. We are talking about the position of the Brahmin community in the Madras Presidency at that time. Now, historically and ritually, they held a very high status. That's well known. But under the British colonial administration, this traditional status translated into, an administrative hegemony, a near-total dominance of the system.
When you say hegemony, give us a sense of the scale here. Are we talking about a slight imbalance or something more extreme?
No, not slight at all. We are talking about a near-total monopoly. The sources, including the textbook, are very clear on this. They highlight that while Brahmins were a very small minority numerically, somewhere around 3 to 5% of the population depending on the district, they had the overwhelming proportion of positions.
In what sectors?
Across the board. The civil service, in educational institutions like colleges and universities, and in the judiciary. If you walked into the Madras Legislative Council, or a university lecture hall, or a high-ranking government office, the faces you saw were almost exclusively from that one very small community.
And this wasn't just limited to government jobs, was it? The influence was wider.
Oh, much wider. And this is a crucial point for understanding the movement. It was the press, too. The media landscape, the newspapers that shaped public opinion, were monopolized by this same demographic.
So if you're a non-Brahmin, you're shut out from both the power structure and the public discourse.
Precisely. And imagine you're, say, a wealthy, educated, landowning, non-Brahmin like a Chettiar or a Mudaliar. You have money, you have influence in your village or your town, but when you go to the capital, Madras City, you have absolutely no voice in the corridors of power. You're effectively an outsider in your own land.
It creates this pressure cooker environment, doesn't it? You have this rising class of educated non-Brahmins who have the credentials, who have the ambition, but they have no access. They're looking at the system and realizing, wait a minute, the game is rigged.
The game is rigged, exactly. But here is the nuance that people often miss, and this is so important for writing good-minded answers on social movements. It wasn't just about we want jobs. That's a trade union argument. This was about something deeper. It was about identity. To build a political movement that can actually sustain itself for decades, you need a story. You need a powerful story about who you are. You need an ideology. And in the early 20th century, the non-Brahmins found their story not in economics, but in linguistics.
This is the intellectual awakening part of the chapter.
Right.
And I found this fascinating because it all seems to start with a grammar book, which seems, well, it seems a bit unlikely. You know, usually revolutions start with a manifesto or a riot. Here, it starts with syntax and phonetics.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But books, especially the right books at the right time, they can be dynamite. In 1856, a missionary named Reverend Robert Caldwell published a book called The Comparative Grammar of the Dravidian or South Indian Family of Languages.
It sounds incredibly dry.
It sounds dry as dust, but I promise you, its impact was explosive.
Okay, so why? What did Caldwell say that was so revolutionary?
Well, before Caldwell, the dominant academic view, you could call it the Sanskrit matrix view, was that pretty much all major Indian languages, and by extension Indian culture, were derived from Sanskrit and the Aryan tradition. It was a very top-down hierarchical model.
Okay, that makes sense.
Caldwell came along and used hard linguistic evidence, syntax, vocabulary, phonology, to prove that Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam belonged to a completely separate, independent family of languages, the Dravidian family.
That's a geopolitical earthquake in the world of academia, because if the language is fundamentally separate...
And the culture is separate, the history is separate, the people are separate. Exactly. It meant that South India had an indigenous civilization that existed independently of, and arguably prior to, the arrival of the so-called Aryans, or the Brahminical Sanskritic tradition.
It provides a historical anchor.
A powerful one. Suddenly, non-Brahmins weren't just lower castes within a Sanskrit-based hierarchy, they were Dravidians, the inheritors of a distinct, ancient, and classical heritage of their own.
It completely flips the script. Instead of being at the bottom of the Aryan ladder, they are the original owners of the Dravidian land.
Exactly. And this idea was then picked up and cemented by a generation of brilliant Tamil scholars. You have figures like Arumuga Nevalar, C.V. Damodaram Pillai, and the legendary U.V. Swaminatha Iyer. They were like literary archaeologists digging up these ancient Sangam literary texts that had been largely forgotten or ignored, written on palm leaves.
Right, rediscovering a lost world.
A lost classical world. And then you have Vikanakasahay Pillai, whose book came out in 1904. The title itself is a political statement. The Tamils, 1,800 years ago.
What was his core argument?
His argument was that the ancient Tamils had a highly sophisticated, urbanized literary civilization long before the Brahmins and the Sanskrit culture arrived in the South. This is crucial because it converts grievance about jobs into pride in heritage. And you need pride to sustain a long, hard political fight. This intellectual work provided the cultural confidence necessary to challenge the status quo.
Okay, so the intellectual ammunition is there. The powder keg is full of social and economic resentment. Now they need a spark. And more importantly, they need a vehicle to carry the fight forward.
They need an organization.
Let's look at the timeline of that organization, because for our prelims listeners, chronology questions are usually where the easy marks are lost if you're not careful.
Right. And it's important to note that it didn't start as a full-blown political party. It began much more modestly as a social welfare association.
This is 1912. The Madras United Leg is formed.
Correct. And the key driver here, the person really nurturing this nascent organization, is Dr. C. Natesa Mudaliar. You should think of him as the architect who laid the foundation.
And what was his initial focus?
It was very practical. He realized that non-Brahmin students coming to Madras for higher education faced a lot of discrimination. They couldn't get rooms in hostels, they couldn't get good food, so he started a hostel for them. And that hostel, as you can imagine, became a hub for discussion, for radical ideas.
It's always the dorm rooms and the coffee houses, isn't it? That's where revolutions are brewed.
Always. So a few months later, in November 1912, the League was renamed the Madras Dravidian Association. The identity is becoming clearer. But the real gears shift in 1916.
1916 is the watershed moment. You've got World War I raging in the background. The Home Rule movement is picking up steam across India, which, as you mentioned, many non-Brahmins were deeply suspicious of.
A very, very important point. Their great fear was that if the British granted Home Rule immediately, it would just mean swapping a white master for a Brahmin master.
Yeah.
They feared Home Rule would just become Brahmin rule.
So they felt they needed their own political voice, separate from the Congress.
They had to. And so in 1916, the South Indian Liberal Federation, or SILF, is born.
SILF. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? I'm a member of the SILF. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue.
It absolutely doesn't. It creates a branding problem. And the founders were smart enough to realize that. Now we have the big three leaders emerging here: Sir P.D. Thegaraya Chetty, Dr. T.M. Nair, and the Raja of Panagal. And we should also include Dr. Natesa Mudaliar.
And note the title, Sir, Dr., Raja. These were not street agitators. These were wealthy, influential, established men. This was an elite movement challenging another elite.
That's a key characteristic of its early phase, yes. And in December 1916, they released the Non-Brahmin Manifesto, which laid out all their grievances and demands in detail.
So how do we get from the clunky South Indian Liberal Federation to the much catchier Justice Party?
Smart media strategy. They knew that the Brahmin community effectively controlled the mainstream English press, papers like the Hindi. So to counter that narrative, they needed their own megaphones. They launched 3 newspapers.
What were they?
Dravidian in Tamil, Andhra Prakasika in Telugu, to cater to the 2 major linguistic groups in the presidency, and crucially, Justice in English.
And the English paper was the one that really took off.
It did. It became their main voice to communicate with the British administration and the English-educated elite across India. Justice became so widely read and cited that people just stopped using the South Indian Liberal Federation name. They started calling them the Justice Party men, and eventually, just the Justice Party.
It's incredible how a media brand can define a political movement. It's like if we started calling the Republicans the Fox News Party or Democrats the MSNBC Party.
That's actually a surprisingly accurate analogy for how a media organ can become synonymous with a political identity. The newspaper was the party's voice. It articulated the grievances day in and day out. We need representation in jobs. We need better access to education. We need a seat at the political table.
Okay, so they're organized. They have a brand name that sticks. Now let's talk about power, because getting elected in colonial India was a very weird game. The rules were, for lack of a better word, rigged, right?
Rigged and deliberately complicated. The key legislation here is the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919, which introduced this bizarre system called Dyarchy. This is a favorite topic for UPSC polity questions, by the way, so it's worth understanding.
Okay, break down Dyarchy for us in simple terms. What was it?
Imagine a car with 2 separate steering wheels. One steering wheel is controlled by the British governor and his hand-picked executive council. He controls what were called the reserved subjects.
And those were?
Those were all the things that really matter for maintaining colonial control. Police, finance, justice, land revenue, you know.
The guns and the money.
Exactly, the guns and the money. Now, the other steering wheel is given to the elected Indian ministers who came from the legislature. They control the transferred subjects.
Which were the less important things, I'm guessing.
Well, they're important for people's daily lives, but not for British control. So things like education, health, local government, agriculture.
So let me get this straight. The British kept all the real power, and they gave the Indians all the responsibility.
You've got it in one. It was a system designed to be frustrating. If you, as the Indian education minister, wanted to build a new school, that's a transferred subject, you had to go and ask the British finance member, a reserved subject, for the money. And he could just say no.
A recipe for gridlock.
Total gridlock. But the Justice Party decided to play the game. They were pragmatists. They said, this system is flawed, but it's the only game in town. We'll take what we can get and use it to our advantage.
So the 1920 election comes around. This is the first big test under this new, weird Dyarchy system.
And it was a landslide victory for the Justice Party, but it came with a massive asterisk.
What was the asterisk?
The Indian National Congress. Under Gandhi's leadership, the Congress was in the middle of the non-cooperation movement. Their official policy was to boycott everything, British courts, schools, and especially these new legislative councils. They said the whole system was a sham.
So their main political opponent didn't even show up to the fight.
The field was wide open. It was like winning a race because the other runners decided not to run. The Justice Party won 63 out of the 98 elected seats, a huge majority.
So who becomes the boss? I would have assumed it would be Periyar, since he was the face of the Manifesto and the senior-most leader.
That's what everyone thought. But in a surprising move, he declined the post of chief minister, or premier as it was called then. He preferred to lead the party from the outside, to be the organizational head.
A bit like a Sonia Gandhi figure in the UPA era, perhaps. The power behind the throne.
That's a very good modern parallel. So the man who became the first chief minister of the Madras Presidency was A. Subbarayalu Reddyar.
Okay, so 1920 is basically a walkover. Then we get to the 1923 election. The Congress is still technically boycotting, but things have changed a little.
They have. The Swarajya Party has emerged from within the Congress. Remember, this is the group led by C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru who disagreed with the boycott. Their strategy was council entry, get elected into the councils in order to wreck them from the inside.
So the Justice Party actually has an opponent this time.
A serious opponent. They fought against the Swarajists, who were very popular nationalists.
And what was the result?
The Justice Party wins again, though with a slightly reduced margin. The Raja of Panagal forms the ministry this time. And this period, the early 1920s under his leadership, is really their golden era of governance. This is when they pass their most heavy-hitting, transformative laws.
But things get a bit messy in the 1926 election, right? The winning streak doesn't continue.
It gets very messy. The election resulted in a hung verdict. No single party had a majority. The Justice Party itself was divided by internal factions and infighting. On the other side, the Swarajya Party actually won the most seats.
Okay, so the Swarajas should have formed the government.
They should have, but they refused to. Remember, their official ideology was to obstruct, not to govern. So you have this bizarre political stalemate.
So you have a winner who won't rule and a loser who can't rule because they're divided.
Exactly, a classic political mess. So in the end, this bizarre situation arose where an independent candidate, P. Subbarayan, formed the ministry. But he was only able to survive because the Swarajya Party, the largest party, supported his government from the outside without actually joining it.
Politics really hasn't changed much in 100 years, has it? Hung parliaments, outside support, coalition drama, it was all there.
It is the eternal dance of politics. But the Justice Party wasn't finished. They did manage to bounce back. In the 1930 election, B. Muniswamy Naidu formed the ministry, and then in 1932, the Raja of Babali took over. They actually managed to hold on to power in one form or another all the way until 1937.
That is a long run in politics. 17 years, mostly in power. Now, being in power is one thing, but doing something with that power is a whole different ballgame. And this, my friends, is the meat of the episode. If you are listening for mains content specifically for GS Paper 1 on society or GS Paper 2 on social justice, grab your pen. This is where the questions are going to come from.
Absolutely. The Justice Party didn't just warm the chairs. They passed legislation that fundamentally re-engineered the social fabric of South India. They didn't just govern, they used the state as a tool for social engineering.
Let's start with the absolute crown jewel of their legacy, the policy they're most famous for, the communal GO.
The communal government orders, specifically GO number 613 of 1921 and a follow-up order in 1922.
What did these orders do exactly?
To put it simply, they introduced reservation. For the first time in Indian history, appointments in government jobs, local bodies, and educational institutions were formally reserved for non-Brahmins.
This is huge. I mean, we talk about reservation today as a settled, if contentious fact of Indian life, but this was the genesis. This is where it all started.
It was absolutely revolutionary. Before this, recruitment was based on a vague notion of merit, which in practice meant it was based on networks and resulted in that caste-based monopoly we talked about. The GOs threw that out. They mandated that appointments had to be distributed among different communities in specific proportions.
So they broke it down.
Yes. The GO laid out a system of communal rotation. Out of every 12 posts, 5 would go to non-Brahmin Hindus, 2 to Brahmins, 2 to Muslims, 2 to Anglo-Indians or Christians, and 1 to the depressed classes. It forced diversity by law. It was a conscious effort to democratize the bureaucracy.
And if you're writing a mains answer on social justice or the history of affirmative action in India, this is your starting point.
It has to be. This is the grandfather of all modern reservation policies in India. It established the principle that the administration must reflect the society it administers. It broke the monopoly.
Okay, but a law is just a piece of paper without a mechanism to enforce it. They didn't just say hire more non-Brahmins, right? They created systems to make sure it happened fairly.
Correct. They understood the need for institutions. The Panigal ministry created the Staff Selection Board in 1924. Its specific job was to select candidates for government service in a fair, transparent manner, adhering to this new system of communal rotation.
Which sounds suspiciously like a precursor to...
The Public Service Commission. And that's exactly what it became. In 1929, the Staff Selection Board was upgraded and formalized into the Public Service Commission of Madras. And here's a fantastic fact check for your prelims notes.
I'm ready.
This was the first of its kind in India.
Wait, really? The Madras Presidency established a Public Service Commission before the central government or any other province?
Yes. The Justice Party in Madras was ahead of the curve. They established a provincial PSC before the government of India did. That just shows you how central this idea of fair representative recruitment was to their entire political project. They wanted to institutionalize this change.
That is a solid bragging right. First in India.
I love that.
Okay, let's move to education. They were pioneers here as well, weren't they?
They were. They introduced measures for free and compulsory elementary education for the first time in the Madras Presidency. But there's a specific detail here that always catches people's attention, and it's come up in state-level exams before. The midday meal scheme.
Hold on, the midday meal scheme. I thought that was a much later invention. I always associate it with K. Kamaraj or M.G. Ramachandran post-independence.
And you're right, the massive statewide scheme that we know today came much later under Kamaraj. But the experiment, the very first pilot project, the proof of concept, was started by the Justice Party.
Where and when?
In 1920, the Madras Corporation, which was controlled by the Justice Party, introduced a scheme to provide free meals to poor children in a school in Thousand Lights, Madras.
Thousand Lights, that's a great visual. A specific location where this massive nation-changing idea was first tested.
It was, and it showed a profound understanding of the link between nutrition and education. The logic was simple. Poor kids weren't coming to school because they were hungry or they were out working for food. If you feed them at school, they will come and they will learn.
It's such a modern, holistic concept, tackling poverty and hunger as an educational tool.
It is. And their focus on education wasn't just general. They put a huge emphasis on the depressed classes, what we would today call Dalits or scheduled castes. They took the responsibility for their education away from the general education department and entrusted it to the labor department to ensure specific, dedicated focus.
To make sure they weren't lost in the shuffle.
Exactly. They provided special funds, fee concessions, and scholarships. They provided free instruction specifically for the children of fisher communities. It was targeted intervention.
And what about higher education? Were they building universities too?
But they were. They were busy at every level. Andhra University was established in 1926 to cater to the Telugu-speaking regions. Annamalai University was established in 1929. They also passed an act to completely reorganize Madras University. And interestingly, they also encouraged indigenous systems of medicine Ayurveda, Siddha, and Unani by giving them official recognition and support. It was a comprehensive approach to knowledge.
Now, here's a controversial one, but a really big one. The temples.
Yes. The Hindu Religious Endowment Act of 1921, later modified in 1925. This was explosive.
Why would a political party get involved in the administration of temples? That seems like deliberately walking into a political minefield.
Their stated reason was to eliminate corruption and mismanagement. The argument was that many of these large, wealthy temples and their endowments were being run by hereditary trustees and mahants who were treating the temple's vast properties and income as their personal piggy banks.
So this is about accountability.
That was the official line. The Justice Party said, these are public endowments, they belong to the community, not a single family. The state has a responsibility to ensure they're managed properly, and the funds are used for the temple and for the public.
So what did the act do? It allowed the state to take control of temple administration.
Essentially, yes. It created a government board to supervise the administration and finances of temples. It was incredibly contentious at the time. The Brahmin community and many Orthodox Hindus opposed it fiercely, calling it unacceptable government interference in religion. But it established a precedent that is still very much alive today.
The idea that the secular government can regulate the secular aspects like finance and administration of religious institutions.
Precisely. This act is the direct ancestor of the Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments, or HRNCE department, that governs temples in Tamil Nadu today. It was a monumental shift in the relationship between the state and religious institutions.
And we absolutely cannot ignore their social reforms, particularly concerning women.
No, we cannot. This is another area where they were far ahead of their time. They passed a resolution in 1921 granting women the right to vote.
1921, that's very early, even by global standards. It's before many Western democracies granted full suffrage.
It is. And they went further. They legally abolished the Devadasi system.
And the textbook implies the critical role of Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy here, who was the first woman legislator in British India.
Yes, she was a doctor, a social reformer, and a legislator nominated to the council. She was the one who championed the bill. The Justice Party provided the legislative vehicle to pass it into law, officially ending the practice where young girls were dedicated to temples, a practice which often led to a life of exploitation. It was a landmark move to restore women's dignity.
Okay, finally, before we move on from their achievements, let's touch on their economic and infrastructure policies. They weren't just social reformers, they were building stuff.
They were. They passed the State Aid to Industries Act in 1922. This was basically the government acting as a venture capitalist, giving credits, land, and water at favorable rates to help entrepreneurs start new industries.
And did it work?
The book says it did. It led to the establishment of new factories in sectors like sugar, engineering, cement, and oil. It was a clear policy to kickstart industrialization in the region. And for the rural areas, they focused on building village road schemes. For the urban poor in Madras, they started some of the first slum clearance and housing schemes.
And there's a land reform element too, right? Something about Panchami lands.
Yes, a policy of giving government-owned wastelands to the depressed classes for cultivation. These were often called Panchami lands. It was a holistic governance model. They were thinking about education, jobs, industrial growth, and social dignity all at the same time.
So, looking at this scorecard, the Justice Party seems incredibly progressive for its time. But running parallel to all this government activity, there was another, more radical force rising. A force that eventually made the Justice Party look like moderate liberals. We have to talk about Periyar.
Periyar E.V. Ramasamy. You can't tell this story without him. He is the catalyst, the iconoclast, the central figure of 20th century Tamil history. Now, it's important to remember, Periyar didn't start in the Justice Party. He was actually a senior leader in the Congress.
That's right. He was the president of the Tamil Nadu Congress Committee at one point. So what happened? Why did he leave?
The split came in 1925, and the core issue was, yet again, representation. Periyar was pushing hard for the Congress Party to officially accept the principle of communal representation of reservation, not just in government jobs, but within the party's own organization. The Brahmin-dominated leadership of the Congress, however, repeatedly refused.
And wasn't there a specific incident at a school, a Gurukulam, that was the last straw?
Yes, the Cheramadevi Gurukulam controversy. It was a nationalist school, partly funded by Congress money, but Periyar found out that Brahmin and non-Brahmin students were being fed in separate dining halls. There was caste-based segregation.
Segregated dining, even for children.
Exactly. Periyar was absolutely furious. He felt that if the Congress couldn't even ensure children were treated equally at a simple meal, how could it possibly be trusted to govern a nation equally? The final political break came when his resolution for communal representation was defeated yet again at the Kanchipuram Conference of the Congress in 1925.
So he walks out, he says, I'm done with this, and he starts his own movement, the self-respect movement, also in 1925.
And this movement was fundamentally different from the Justice Party. The Justice Party was a political machine fighting for council seats, jobs, and government power. The self-respect movement was a social and cultural revolution. Its aim was to uplift Dravidians, yes, but by attacking the very root of the problem, the caste system itself and the Brahminical ideology that, in his view, supported and justified it.
He didn't pull any punches, did he?
Absolutely none. He was a radical rationalist. He denounced the caste system, child marriage, enforced widowhood for women, and he introduced this radical new concept of self-respect marriages.
Describe those for the listener. What made them different?
A self-respect marriage was a marriage conducted without a Brahmin priest. No Sanskrit mantras, no sacred fire rituals, none of the traditional ceremonies. It was simply a secular exchange of vows, often presided over by an elder or a community leader. It was a direct, powerful challenge to the idea that you needed a Brahmin intermediary to solemnize the most important events in your life. It was about reclaiming personal and social agency.
And just like the Justice Party, he understood the critical power of the press.
Oh, even more so. His journals were his primary weapon. He founded a series of papers with very provocative names. Kudi Arasu, which means the Republic, Vidudalai, which means liberty, and Parachi, which means revolution.
And a quick note for our listeners studying for the exams. One of the common PYQ styles is to ask which journal was not founded by a particular leader. The option often given for Periyar is Swaraja.
That's a great catch. Swaraja was run by people like T. Prakasam and was later associated with Rajaji. It was a mainstream nationalist paper. Periyar's papers were the ones with revolution and liberty and republic in their titles. Kudi Rasu was the official organ of the self-respect movement.
So we have this dynamic situation. The Justice Party governing from within the system, and Periyar stirring up a social revolution from the outside. But all good things, or at least all political reigns, come to an end. The Justice Party rule eventually collapsed.
Yes, the end came swiftly. The catalyst for their decline was the Government of India Act of 1935, which did away with Dyarchy and introduced provincial autonomy. This meant real power, real control over the entire provincial government was finally up for grabs.
And the Congress, which had been boycotting for years, decided this was too big a prize to ignore. They decided to contest the elections.
Exactly. And the 1937 provincial election was a political massacre for the Justice Party.
How bad was it?
It was a wipeout. The Congress, led in Madras by the formidable C. Rajagopalachari, or Rajaji, swept the polls. They won 152 seats. The Justice Party, which was led by K.V. Reddy Naidu at this point, was absolutely decimated. They barely won a handful of seats.
Why such a sudden and total collapse? They had a 17-year track record of achievements we just discussed.
It was a combination of things. One is simple anti-incumbency. 17 years is a long time. But more importantly, the Justice Party leaders, the Rajas and Zamindars, had become seen as out-of-touch elites. They were widely perceived as being pro-British at a time when the tide of nationalism was at its peak. They just looked like yesterday's men.
Well, the Congress had built a mass movement.
A massive grassroots network. Congress, under Gandhi and Nehru, had connected with the masses in a way the Justice Party never did. In the end, the Justice Party was seen as the party of rich, loyalist landlords, while Periyar, ironically, was the one actually connecting with the common people on social issues. The Justice Party got squeezed from both sides.
So the Justice Party is out of power, politically irrelevant. But they didn't just disappear into thin air. They transformed.
This is the rebirth, the final, crucial chapter in their story. The year is 1944. The place is the Salem Conference of the Justice Party.
And this is where a new leader steps onto the main stage. C.N. Annadurai, Periyar Anna, as he came to be known.
Anna, who was Periyar's brilliant lieutenant at the time, stands up and passes a historic resolution. He proposes that the Justice Party should officially change its name to Dravidar Kazhagam, or DK, the Dravidian Federation.
And this wasn't just a cosmetic name change, was it? It was a fundamental change in function and ideology.
A complete change. Along with the name change, they made another momentous decision. They would stop contesting elections altogether. They decided to transform from a political party seeking power into a purely social movement dedicated to propagating Dravidian ideology, rationalism, and self-respect.
Which is fascinating, because years later, Anna himself would split from Periyar and the DK to form the DMK, precisely to go back into electoral politics. But that, as they say, is a story for another deep dive.
It is. The key takeaway is that the Justice Party died as a governing entity in 1937, but its soul, its ideology, and its policies lived on in the DK, and then later in the DMK and the AI-ADMK. The platform they built in the 1920s, Reservation, state autonomy, language rights, social justice, became the bedrock for all future politics in Tamil Nadu.
Okay, so we've covered the history from rise to fall to rebirth. Now let's do exactly what we promised at the beginning. Let's explicitly link this content to the exam. Expert, looking at the PYQ papers provided in our source material, how does this chapter map onto the test for an aspirant listening right now?
Let's break it down by the type of question UPSC likes to ask. First, and most obviously for prelims, is chronology. We saw this pattern in the 2019 and 2021 papers, where they give you a list of events and you have to arrange them in the correct order.
So what's the key timeline for this chapter?
You need to have this sequence burned into your memory. 1. Formation of the South Indian Liberal Federation, SILF, in 1916. 2. The first Communal GO in 1921. 3. The creation of the Staff Selection Board in 1924. 4. The establishment of Annadurai University in 1929. 5. The disastrous election defeat in 1937. 6. The transformation into Dravidar Kazhagam in 1944. If you mix up the staff selection board date with the Public Service Commission date, for instance, you could easily lose the marks.
Got it. The timeline is absolutely key. What's the next type?
Associations and founders. This is a classic Type 2 question. We saw this with the Dyarchy question in the 2020 paper matching books to authors or organizations to founders. For this chapter, you must be able to match Madras Dravidian Association, XII, Dr. C. Natesa Mudaliar, South Indian Liberal Federation, the original name, Periyar, Kiem Nair, and the Raja of Punagal. Self-Respect Movement, Bus Periyar, EVR, and the book The Tamils 1800 Years Ago, Buzvi Kanakasapai Pillai. The trick is not to get confused between the initial Justice Party leaders and the founder of the Self-Respect Movement, although their paths converge later.
And the journals are part of this, right?
Absolutely. The journals are crucial. If the question asks, which of the following was a Justice Party newspaper? Oh, you need to look for Justice, Dravidian, or Andhra Prakasika. If the question is about Periyar's publications, the answer will be Kudi Arasu, Viduthlai, or Parachi. Remember the 2020 question about the Vital Vijvansak journal. It shows that UPSC loves to ask about obscure journals associated with social reform movements. Don't skip the names of the newspapers.
Okay, that's prelims. What about mains? We saw that question in the 2016 GS2 paper about the role of pressure groups and informal politics.
That's a great connection. You could absolutely argue that the Justice Party began its life as a pressure group, that is SILF, before it became a formal party. But look at a more recent question from the 2022 GS2 paper. While the national political parties in India favor centralization, the regional parties are in favor of state autonomy. Comment.
And this is the Justice Party's legacy in a nutshell.
It is. They were the first major political force in India to really push for regional representation and rights against a centralized authority, which at the time was the British colonial government. When you answer a question like that, citing the Justice Party as the historical ancestor of this entire trend of regional politics adds immense depth and weight to your answer.
And surely any question on social justice or reservation in GS2 or GS1 society would be a direct hit from this chapter.
100%. If you get a question like, critically examine the evolution of affirmative action policies in India, you cannot start your answer in 1950 with the Constitution. You must begin by mentioning the communal GOs of the Justice Party in the 1920s. That shows the examiner that you understand the historical continuity of the policy. Also, look at the 2022 GS2 question 1.
Yeah.
The most significant achievement in modern law in India is the constitutionalization of environmental problems. You can draw a powerful parallel here to how the Justice Party institutionalized social justice. They moved it from a street-level demand to a formal government order, a law.
That's the so what factor we are always looking for. It's not just about listing facts. It's about building arguments and drawing connections.
Precisely. It's about usage.
Uh.
The facts are the bricks. Your arguments are the house you build with them.
Okay, let's wrap this incredible story up. We have gone from the 1916 Manifesto through the golden age of the 1920s reforms, the temples, the schools, the reservation policies, all the way to the 1937 collapse and the 1944 transformation into the decay. The Justice Party truly laid the foundation for Tamil Nadu's unique and influential political culture.
It really did. It proved that a regional party could not only govern effectively, but could innovate in governance and social policy in ways the central government hadn't even started thinking about yet.
So here is a final provocative thought for you to chew on as you go about your day, learner. Expert, hit them with it.
Consider this. How different would the debates around India's federal structure or our national reservation policy look today if the Justice Party hadn't pioneered these concepts in the Madras Presidency back in the 1920s? Was the so-called Dravidian model just a regional ripple in a colonial pond, or was it actually the first wave of a national transformation that we are still living through today?
Ooh, I like that. Was it a ripple or was it a wave? Something to definitely think about. All right, learner, that is it for this deep dive. Once again, if this helped you, please subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP on YouTube.
And if you can, support us on Patreon. It helps us survive and thrive in this content game.
It really does. Join the public Telegram for all those free notes and the practice PYQs we mentioned. And for the really serious aspirants, join the private library for the premium organized content. You won't regret it. Like, share, and please comment. Let us know what topic you want us to tackle next.
Keep learning and keep questioning.
We'll see you in the next one.